Hello, and welcome to the In-Gaming Podcast, where myself, DestinoWill, along with my good friend and co-host Hardiment, talk all things video games. You can catch us at 7 p.m. GMT every Tuesday here on YouTube with a brand new episode. We love to hear from our listeners, so please give us a shout with any questions, feedback, and suggestions, either in the comment section below or over at Twitter at In-Gaming Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Without further ado, let's take a look at what's been going on this week in gaming. This week in gaming news, Ubisoft and Platinum Games have both said that they are open to buyouts, which may mean there's going to be many more acquisitions on the horizons. This further goes towards consolidation within the games industry, but it's very possible that with Sony buying Bungie last week and Bungie retaining their agency and being somewhat independent, that the idea of being bought out is becoming more appealing to publishers and developers. It may also be the case of, with the metaverse on the horizon, a case of manpower rather than properties. So is it more about acquiring staff, either in numbers or in terms of their skills, their talents, as opposed to simply buying IPs and big titles? What are your thoughts on this, Hardiment?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because it's maybe the first time we've seen a developer come out and openly say, "Look, if you want to buy us, we would be happy to entertain the idea." The same with Ubisoft, who obviously are at the moment quite a big publisher and developer. It's not like in the case of Bungie, where they're far smaller, have just at the moment, just have Destiny as an active IP. Ubisoft are a massive global company, so the fact that they're saying they're open to being bought out by it seems to be either Microsoft or Sony. Unless maybe another entertainment brand decides to get in on gaming, maybe Google again. After the failure of Stadia. Making more of a push towards developing new titles, exclusive titles. So it's interesting to see Platinum Games kind of come out and say, look, if you let us do what we're doing now, but with bigger budgets, more financing, more kind of scope to acquire staff, bigger recruitment drives, then it's going to be interesting to see if any other companies kind of follow in that same vein. Will we see a Platinum Games sowing the seeds at the moment for an already signed acquisition? Are they making fans of the company aware that this is something that's in discussion with whomever it might be? Are they prepping people for an acquisition, which would, I think, if it was going to be anybody, would probably go to Microsoft, given that they had decided to work on Scalebound when the Xbox One first launched, although that game was obviously retired, cancelled, whatever you want to call it. And like you said, with the metaverse manpower, I think a lot of it is simply having sheer numbers of developers on board in order to build out whatever Microsoft or Sony's vision of the metaverse might be. And Activision Blizzard, they bought for an unbelievable sum of money, 70 billion. But when you think about their lineup, it's you couldn't even probably name you a game beyond Call of Duty, Overwatch, Diablo, World of Warcraft. That's a very small number of IPs to be spending 70 billion on buying. They've not got a really attractive lineup at the moment. So where some might question where the sense is in paying that much for a company like Activision Blizzard. Is there more to it than just purchasing IPs?
I think you're onto something there, because as you say with the Activision Blizzard lineup, look at each of those titles, and not really any of them are in a particular great spot. I know Call of Duty is obviously the big money maker as always, and last year's title Vanguard was its record lowest sales in a long time. World of Warcraft becomes more and more irrelevant the bigger and bigger Final Fantasy 14 gets. Overwatch 2 seems to be kind of lost a bit, and every time they do announcement about it, it seems to get a negative reaction. Diablo 2 launched with a lot of the remake launched with a lot of issues, and 4 seems a million years away. So they've not really got much going for them in terms of prospects, it seems, apart from some guaranteed income here and there with the franchises.
Yeah, and I think with the release of Lost Ark recently, and the fact that surged to massive popularity on Steam, it could be that a game like Lost Ark, which is a live service title, is an MMO, it's got kind of staying power to be relevant in the gaming industry and the ARPG genre for a number of years to come. Is Diablo 4, when that finally releases, is that going to get the reception that it needs, to keep Blizzard in relevance? Because a lot of people might still be playing Lost Ark at that time. Obviously, the Diablo brand brings in a lot of people, but we can't be forgetting, do you guys even own phones? The debacle at BlizzCon about the Diablo mobile game, which I'm not even sure is even coming out anymore. I feel like I read something about
they released a beta at some point, and people have played it and said it was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And I know it's still sat in my Play Store as pre-registered or something in it.
Yeah,
but it's been like that for a good year and a half, I think now.
So I don't know where that title is up to, and I think the sheer negative press that came along with again a developer patronizing the community, even if the game is great, it might struggle to see the kind of reception it needs, and I feel like the same might come of Diablo 4. That's not that's not even touching on the issues that Diablo 3 launched with. That game was unplayable for a number of weeks. It launched with a kind of a dreadful auction house that many people found issues with, and not being able to even log in on day one of that game's release. So it's going to be interesting, because what else is coming down the line? If
there was a fun bug with the Diablo 2 remake when it came out, where on PC, if you alt tabbed out of the game, it would delete your character, which I found. I think they fixed it and made them retrievable, but it took a while, and obviously it was a ridiculous launch bug.
I mean, I find that kind of amusing, because there've been all the issues with the Raven software QA testers, and the fact that a lot of them were being let go at a time where kind of money is tight. There's a cost of living crisis across the world, and Raven Software and Activision were just letting them go, especially when the Activision brand was in tatters. So it's somewhat amusing to think that is something that a QA tester would probably come across in early play testing, that managed to be missed and found its way into the final release, while at the same time they're saying we're going to get rid of these QA testers because the title's wrapped up, we don't need them anymore, and they stumble into glaring issues like alt tabbing out of a game, deleting your character. So it's going to take years for Microsoft to sort out the Activision brand, years, and it's the same with the Ubisoft brand and all the quartz and the NFTs and things like that. But I do think generally we're going to see more consolidation, more acquisitions of these smaller publishers. Somebody's probably thinking about buying EA. Somebody's maybe thinking about buying Take-Two, although Grand Theft Auto puts them in a very beneficial position. Actually, I'm not even sure whether Take-Two have already been bought out by Tencent, probably. So
Possibly.
So it's going to keep happening, whether we like it or not. Acquisitions are on the horizon as we move into a more centralized kind of gaming environment.
I'm not, and until, I mean, ask me again in 5 years' time or 10 years, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to be a wholly bad thing. I mean, there's obviously going to be negatives to the situation, but growing up, it was very much the way that each platform had its own set of games and properties, and it was all just very little cross-platform. That's more of a in the last decade or so, maybe.
Yeah,
and that was always, it seemed healthy for the competition between the different consoles back then.
I think that came with the move to online play. I think just generally the more online, the more online focused, multiplayer focused games became, the more it started to make sense to give people the opportunity to play these games across multiple different platforms.
Yeah.
So that even if they weren't on a platform with their friends, they still were able to talk about these games, still able to have that discussion about Modern Warfare 2 or whatever game it might have been back in the day that was massively popular on all on all platforms: PC, PS3, Xbox 360. So if we start to see more brands be acquired, but they're able to retain their independence or their agency, and they're able to release games multi-platform, like Call of Duty have said they're going to continue to do on PlayStation, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we'll have to see what the end game is. What's the next evolutionary step in the video game environment, the video game sector, that these acquisitions are all moving towards or are for. I think that's going to be important to see how that develops over the next 4 or 5 years. So with that being said, I think we're going to move on to our next topic. Now for a quick bit of news about Bioshock 4. So this title has been in the works for some time. Obviously, the last Bioshock title that released was in 2013, which was with Bioshock Infinite. It was the last title that Ken Levine was part of, a creative director on. And since then, Take-Two have been determined to continue on the franchise. I do recall when Ken Levine left, they said we're going to continue to release Bioshock games. But now, 9 years later, one has not materialized yet, despite some leaks in December. There's been no official announcement. And now there's been some news of some further issues with its development, which include a number of disagreements that led to Cloud Chamber staff being let go or resigning for a variety of reasons. Now, Cloud Chamber are the company that have been tasked with bringing the next Bioshock game out, and somewhere in the range of, I think, about 40 or 50 staff were fired or they resigned due to disagreements internally about the direction that the game was heading in. Now, we don't know specifically if this is something to do with issues with management, or if it's issues with narrative, or maybe the kind of Take-Two micromanagement of the title. We don't know. That's all kind of speculation at the moment. But it does seem that Take-Two have moved their projections out, which were initially maybe sometime this year for the game to be announced or released, to the end of 2024. So now there's going to be another couple of years left on the development of that game. That's even if the game actually sees the light of day. But alongside that, there is a Bioshock movie in the works at Netflix as well. So it does seem as though the Bioshock brand is still kind of moving forward, and eventually they do want Bioshock 4 to release. But I have my own personal issues with there being another Bioshock title. My belief being that Ken Levine was spearheaded those titles, was the driver for the ingenuity and the innovation within those games. And I'm not sure we're going to see that with a Bioshock 4 or even with a Bioshock movie. So we have to see how that develops. But what are your thoughts? Are you a big fan of the Bioshock franchise? What did you think when you saw this news?
I have a weird relationship with the Bioshock franchise. The first game, never fell in love with it the same way a lot of people did, until going back to it many years later. Second game was kind of just there for me, but Infinite absolutely loved. That's like one of my favorite games, like probably ever. It's so good. And then I felt that the DLCs kind of nicely tied up the stuff from the first couple of games with the return to Rapture. So overall, I think it's it covers everything with Infinite and those expansions.
Yeah.
If it's good, I happily play a next gen Bioshock. I think it'd be really cool. But at the same time, do I think it's necessary? Not at all. I don't think it's needed. I feel like they've got an IP on their hands, and they know it's made them money before. They know it's popular, and they're just, rather than coming up with something new, just saying, right, let's do it. Let's just do another one.
Let's continue to milk the franchise. I completely agree. And I think just from a logical perspective, we've had Bioshock 1, which was set in a city in the sea. And we had Bioshock Infinite, which was set in a city in the clouds. When it comes to how they push the boundaries even further than Bioshock Infinite and the original Bioshock already did, in terms of the kind of mind games that those titles played with you. Where else is there to go? There's been rumors that it's meant to be set in an Antarctic city set in the 60s, which I think could be interesting. Could maybe introduce some Lovecraftian elements in terms of kind of going back to the more horror theme of the original title. But like I say, those games were the brainchild of Ken Levine, and with him not being part of the project anymore, I just can't see how it could stay honest to itself and the franchise. And alongside that, what on earth could the script be to Bioshock? I know it was leaked some time ago, but I've not read it. I've not read the script to that film. So
if they essentially just adapt the original story, which, as you say, Ken Levine did right, and they do a good job of it, then, because presumably a large part of the target audience will be people, just the average Netflix viewer, not necessarily people who play Bioshock, which presumably is only a small fraction of Netflix viewers.
Yes.
So I imagine they would probably just try and remake the first game, which isn't impossible. I mean, it's not an overly long game, so to condense it down to the length of the film, it's quite a reasonable ask.
And I think the concept, if I were to envision any director to take on that concept, it would probably be Christopher Nolan. I know he's not part of the project, or at least they've not announced kind of who is part of it. Christopher Nolan's had his own issues with kind of streaming services in the past, and the effect that has on cinema. So I don't necessarily see him being involved with it, but I feel like if somebody were thinking along the same lines as Nolan, then it could be an interesting title based on the first game. Yeah.
My pick for a director would be, especially if it's lean more into the kind of half horror side of it, like not horror, such like the darker kind of. Because if you take away like the fun aspects of the game, it is quite creepy and weird in a lot of ways. Guillermo del Toro probably be my pick.
That's a brilliant suggestion. I know he's already done a film for Netflix, I think recently, or it's coming out in the near future.
I think you're right. Yeah, I can't remember what it is.
I believe I've seen a trailer for it, and it looks quite, again, creepy. Obviously Pan's Labyrinth was.
Yeah, that's that kind of.
Yeah, vibe. was a very kind of anxiety-inducing film, I think. So
we know he's a games guy as well, because I mean he's literally in Death Stranding. But
yeah, and also it's just his connections with Kojima prior as well, with the Silent Hills title that was planned. So I think either one of those I think would be a really good fit. But
yeah.
we'll have to see what happens with that. And with that being said, we'll wrap up there for this section and move on to our next one, which is talking about the fact that Nintendo have announced that the 3DS and the Wii U online stores are going to be taken down in 2023. So we'll move on to that now.
Yeah, so as you just said, Nintendo have announced that the 3DS and Wii U stores are going to be taken offline in 2023. So this is a worrying development for people committed to the preservation of video game history. We'll get into that a bit more in a moment. But we can appreciate that stores, they can't stay online forever. It's going to cost resources. And from a purely business perspective, it makes no sense for these online stores, for old platforms to still exist. It's going to cost energy, it's going to cost money. And obviously every company, their business, they're always trying to, remain profitable. This brings up an interesting conversation about physical media, because we're always kind of sort of being put in the direction of digital, whether it's games or films or anything. Digital ownership or streaming services seems to be the way everything's going. But is it going to be the case that if you want to have a game, get hold of a copy of a game after a certain point, physical is going to be the only way to do it? I know, so we both have PS5s, and I know you have the digital only model. So do you have any thoughts on this?
It's an interesting one, because I'm in two minds in that I appreciate that kind of preserving games and the legacy of games, or even just preserving the code itself, is incredibly important, because it just, in terms of the kind of landscape of, we're getting very broad here, but the landscape of human history, just like with anything, it's important that those landmarks, through time and the evolution of video games, just have a place to live. And with taking down online stores, you are making that increasingly more difficult, especially if titles have not had a physical version, which is the case with some indie titles, some smaller titles from publishers that they haven't felt need a physical version. But on the same hand, like you said, I recognize that the businesses have to maximize profit, remain profitable, which in the current climate is obviously more difficult now than it's ever been. PS5s are gone as soon as they are up on storefronts, whether to scalpers or to people who obviously get to them quicker than others might. And so there are a lot of people out there who still want PS5s, still out there playing on PS4s. And while that might be the case, having online stores for legacy consoles like the Wii U, like the 3DS, just doesn't make a lot of sense, because very few people are likely engaging with these services, but they take up server space. Nintendo have to pay to keep these running. They don't just exist, in the cloud, owned by somebody else. It costs money that comes out of budget for new consoles, new games releasing. It all feeds into each other. But I also have the digital only PS5, which I got mostly because it was the only one I could get hold of on pre-order. But also because I just don't, the physical act of inserting a disc and having to swap out discs is not appealing to me anymore. And I think part of that comes from the fact that I've been playing PC games for 2 decades now. And PC games, obviously, for a long time did have a physical component. You had a DVD that you put into your computer, but probably since about the early 2010s, new build PCs would forego a DVD drive or a CD drive. It wasn't worth having those because you bought games on Steam, you bought games on Origin, well, now Epic Games, take your pick of launcher, but you bought those games online. You didn't have there was no physical component to it that you swapped out like you would with a console. And so I've been digital only for a long time, which means that I maybe am more, in favor of saying, right, well, these online stores just can't stay online. It costs resources, so I don't see the massive issue. But at the same time, it's worth remembering that without physical copies of these, as soon as the code gets taken down from the internet, and considering how strict Nintendo are when it comes to distributing their software elsewhere, it's going to become impossible to get hold of some of these games. So it's a funny one. It's a bit of a mix. I can understand from both sides where the issues are, and I think maybe one thing that could possibly solve that is more limited physical runs. So not removing the physical aspect of video games entirely, even though that's how we're moving with television, with movies, but instead release those in a limited quantity. Because I think even with a limited quantity, I don't think you're going to see a lot of these games sell out physically, because most people will buy them online. That is just how most people consume video games these days. So it also helps people who want to play offline having a physical version.
Yeah.
So but even that, I suppose have a maybe an against the grain opinion of, which is that obviously lots of parts of the world, internet connections can be incredibly slow or hard to come by, but for the most part, the consumers of video games, to be in a position to consume a video game, it's very likely that you have maybe not the fastest internet connection in the world, but some form of internet connection. And therefore, the argument that this is solely for people who want to play these games offline, I don't see a lot of value in that argument, because I just don't think that is a big enough of a case, a big enough of a scenario where it makes sense for companies to continue to print at environmental cost, at financial cost, physical versions of games. But I do think for the preservation of those games, it's incredibly important. So probably going to get a lot of hate for that opinion. But it's some of those reasons are justifiable. Some of those reasons are less so. That doesn't mean that physical media should go anywhere. But just the arguments for keeping that physical media that conversation needs to maybe be a bit clearer, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Before I go on, I've got a few things I wanted to add to that, but before that, I just wanted to address a few of the things that you just said. So, one thing is with regards to the stores themselves, I think you can liken it in many ways to a physical shop, in that if you have a physical shop on the street and one person a week comes in to buy something really old because it's the only place you can buy it, that's not a sustainable model to keep that store open, which is kind of what, a Wii U store, so to be honest, no one bought a Wii U in the first place anyway. It's all about, right? I mean, I don't know if they could, I don't know how much effort and money it takes to make it so that you could download and play those games on a Switch. Presumably more than I think it is, because otherwise they would have just done it. But that's that. The other thing you mentioned, which is something I think about quite a bit actually, is the environmental impact of just for things in general. But so I originally wanted a digital as well, largely for the reason of not buying like more and more plastic essentially, because I thought that was it's one of those things trying to reduce in the world. And also it's cheaper, so that was the reason. But like yourself, I got the disc version because it was the only one available. So that was that. But then I'm kind of like, I think it's easy to ignore that there's also an environmental factor related to digital things because of like servers, data centers, everything like running. Obviously, has quite a lot of impact on energy usage and that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I'd have to do some research and get some numbers to know which way is actually the best.
Yeah, it'd be
those terms.
interesting. I mean, just in terms of kind of on the spot, I think there's obviously far more logistical aspects to physical releases of video games, and those logistics,
including the shipping and everything, aren't you? So
those logistics are more likely to not be sustainable. So if a lorry has to take physical media from a shipping container to a store to run in a physical, to be sold in a physical store, notwithstanding the amount of copies that don't sell and do go to waste or kind of stay in a storeroom somewhere or are crushed or eventually crushed or what have you, there's far more variables in that link that would have to be sustainable. Right. I think if you could say, right, well, all of our video game deliveries are made with 100% sustainable fuel, the shipping containers that come over are 100% sustainable, but that is far less likely than a server room, which ultimately could be ran off renewable energy. And so it's a really difficult discussion to have, because is video game preservation worth more than the environmental impact of continuing to print millions of physical games that don't get sold, that aren't bought by people, and instead people just buy a digital version? And if anything, we can talk about this even further, but I think I would like to see Sony flip the switch and say digital copies are going to cost less. Yeah. Because the incentive to buying physical versions is often that you can go on Amazon, find a game for £15, £20 that you can get delivered next day, and that is double the price on the PlayStation Store. We see,
and that's when it's on sale.
That's when it's on sale, and we see $70 games in America or £70 games here. We don't see any reduction in price.
No, because they can't do exchange rates.
Exactly.
Or they refuse to.
To. So, and same with obviously Australia. And so it's a question of what could Sony be doing more aside from making a cheaper digital version. What could Sony be doing more to incentivize you to purchase games digitally, in order to start to reduce the amount of physical games that are printed? But like you say, I think we'd have to see some numbers. How many physical copies are printed? How many are sold? Who is still walking into Game or GameStop in the US and purchasing physical media? Because CEX, which is probably I'm not sure of an equivalent in the States, but I'm more likely to go into CEX to buy a pre-owned game that somebody has already purchased than I am to walk into Game and buy a brand new copy, because there's maybe an environmental element to purchasing pre-owned titles than going in to purchase kind of brand new ones. So I personally don't go anywhere near a game shop most of the time. I might have a look at the games section in a supermarket.
I went into a game the other day, but simply because they had a massive sign in the window saying they were closing that branch and they had a big sale on.
Oh, okay, all right.
And I managed to pick up The Last of Us Part 2 for like £12, and it was actually a new copy. But that's across the road from the CEX in my city. So I then went into the CEX and bought some more stuff with some trading credit I had.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's something that
That was a good.
we definitely need to get you playing, so that we can have a discussion about that. Although maybe it's
Too many,
maybe
too
it's
many
unwise.
games.
Too many games. Yes, exactly.
I'll get there eventually. It's that I own it now, so that's which is a rare situation where I actually managed to buy it physically new for less than like anywhere else from a
Yeah.
shop. So, sorry, should I say? No, you say you can get it cheap on Amazon, but typically in a store
Yes.
new, it's quite
Yeah,
pricey.
it's more expensive, and certainly I think cheaper than it costs on the PlayStation Store. That's for certain.
Yeah. So I would actually like to just look at this from a slightly different perspective. As you know, I have worked in and around museums quite a bit, which obviously is largely about preserving history and art and such things, which of course video games would come under both those things in
Yeah.
various ways. So one of the sort of main ethos of museums in the modern day, at least anyway, is that everything should be accessible to everybody, no matter where you're from, how old you are, whatever. So there's already a barrier to entry if you're looking at a game store as a potential curated collection of items, in that one, you have to have the appropriate platform, and two, you need to purchase it, which is fine because that's why it's there. So it's not quite the same. The kind of interesting thing here is because of the digital format, it actually makes it easier than ever to preserve history and art. Whereas in the past, you'd have to rely on physical things standing the test of time, like not breaking apart, not degrading. Whereas if something's stored digitally, it's there. And as long as technology exists as the way it does now and continues to improve, the internet doesn't just die forever somehow. That's all going to be there somewhere. And I think closing these stores flies in the face of this idea of preserving stuff, because it's not just about the games themselves. And I can sit here and say, I don't want to close it because I want to play this game forever. I want the chance to buy it. But it's not just about that. It's about the fact games are art, but they're also history in the way that they're a product of their time. You can learn a lot about the people who made them, about the society it was created within. Like, how was that game influenced by the time it was made at? And also, the flip of that, how was society at the time influenced by that game being released and played by people? And so the thing that I was going to say was it's not quite the same as extreme as, say, book burning or destroying monuments. It's more akin to, say, a private collector hoarding artworks and artifacts and not sharing them with the public. Because while technically, so say Nintendo have the rights to these games, I mean, a lot of them they've obviously created themselves or funded the creation of, so that's fair enough. But a lot of the things developed by others, they just have the rights to. And they're keeping them for themselves. Their code is locked away. No one can see it ever again. No one can purchase it. No one can replicate it. It still exists, but it's, unless they change their mind, it's lost to the general public. And this is the kind of stuff which 100 years, 1,000 years from now could be incredibly useful and insightful to future historians. I know I'm going a bit off topic, but I think that there is a huge value to preserving them in some way. If it's not on an online store, in some, I don't know, perhaps some kind of digital gallery where people can freely browse them somehow. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in my head, for some reason, the ship of Theseus comes up. And the reason that it comes up is because obviously the concept of replacing worn panels and at the end, is it eventually exactly the same thing that it was before it was replaced by all these new component parts? Reverse engineering games is, I think, a similar concept in that coders and programmers figuring out the code of some of these titles by reverse engineering these games and kind of building it from the ground up, using kind of new code. Those are the sorts of things that I think someone like Nintendo still decide to kind of shoot down. I'm pretty sure it's happened before where somebody's kind of reverse engineered Super Mario 64, and there's been issues with kind of Nintendo's lawyers, and over the rights to video games, despite the fact that this wasn't copied code. This was originally created code that just happens to replicate the title. And so it seems like Nintendo want to take stores offline, but would also want to go kind of at the neck of those doing their best to make sure that these games aren't completely forgotten about, and that even if somebody does kind of reverse engineer some of this code or find other ways to preserve it once the store is taken down, Nintendo will go at them and will cease and desist, and will use everything in the kind of copyright and intellectual property playbook to make sure that can't happen, which means that people who want to preserve video game history are kind of left with no option. There's no way to make this happen without the publisher reversing course, like Sony did with the PS3 and the PS Vita store. When they initially said that they were going to take those down, they reversed course and said, we're not going to do that anymore, and we made the wrong decision. So I only see it going one way, which is that that's it. That's the end of these online stores and some of the content that are on them, or Nintendo change tack, go back on themselves. But for some reason, I see Nintendo as being probably the most, obtuse when it comes to doing a U-turn and going back on their decision. So we don't know. I mean, it was really great kind of bringing in the historical kind of museum theory aspects of it, and I think that's going to be a much more important part of the topic once maybe the conversation about being able to play games offline diminishes as more people around the world have access to the internet. The conversation is going to be more along the lines of that museum theory, preservation of kind of art and history in its time and place. But we could probably talk for hours more on this topic, and I'm sure we will in the future as this starts to happen more and more, and we start to see more and more online stores go offline. But I think for now we'll wrap that up there. If you've covered everything.
Yeah, I think that's good for now.
Yeah, good. So we'll move on to the next section, which is just talking a bit about what we've been playing over the past week. Will, do you want to go first? What's been on your console over the past week?
Yeah, sure. So this week I've mostly been trying to tie up a few unfinished things because, as we've mentioned previously, there's a lot of games coming out this week, the next few weeks. So more than anything, just trying to fill a little hard drive space because there's never enough. So I finished off the absolutely fantastic Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a game I would recommend to anybody. It certainly deserves a spot alongside Insomniac Spider-Man and the Batman Arkham series as comic book properties that just really got it right. Like, everything about it is great. They've done absolute justice to the property itself, but also made a really fun, engaging game at the same point. I've also dipped back into Horizon Zero Dawn because I'd never actually played the Frozen Wilds expansion. So this expansion was very good. Not too long, not too short. Got me a little more hyped for Forbidden West because I wasn't too excited, but after sort of jumping back in, I'm feeling like I should pick it up quite soon. The side quests weren't crazy interesting, so I didn't do all of them. Maybe this is something that's remedied in the sequel. Who knows? I also, cause you can actually play this DLC from I think when you hit level 30 in the main game. but I was playing after I'd completed the main game where you're level 50. So all the gear and abilities and everything I'd unlocked was way better than the stuff you could actually get in the DLC. The main story itself throughout the DLC though was really good and more than enough to carry my interest all the way through it. It's the first time I'd played the game on PS5 with the patch which allows it to run at 60 FPS, and it was absolutely stunning. Felt super smooth. Again, can't wait to see what a sequel developed with the PS5 specifically in mind is going to look like. I have played one new game this week. Well, new to me, it's been out a little while. It's Ghost Runner, which I feel has gone under the radar a little. It's visually stunning, very hard game. You will die, get hit once, literally every time. I mean, it may change further in the game. I don't know if you get armor or abilities or anything, but to point them at, it is a one-hit death at any given time. It plays a lot like Mirror's Edge. You're a robot ninja though, with a cool katana, which is awesome. So you're doing your wall running, then you just jump off, cut guys in half, do a bit more wall running. It's very difficult, but it does have generous checkpoints and almost non-existent load times, so it doesn't become frustrating in the way that, for example, playing Demon's Souls on PS3 would have been, because you're straight back into the action and you just have to redo that one area where you've got to figure out how to take out all the enemies. Usually you can figure, there's loads of different ways to do it. You can run around the arena and you can go left, go right, go through the middle, and it depends which way you go, which ones will spot you. And that impact whether or not they're aware of your presence when you get to them. So by taking them in different orders, you're giving yourself either different challenges or advantages. I don't think there's any real right way to do it, but yeah, it's just really good. It's a lot of fun. It's very cool. That's all I've been playing.
Yeah, it's good. I've been I have had an eye on Ghost Runner, but I've not taken a chance on it. So it sounds like it's something I need to check out. And Demon's Souls being said, have you played the PS5 remake yet?
I still have not, because it refuses to become cheaper.
Oh, okay.
And
no.
and I was holding out, and then now Elden Ring's on the way, so I'm kind of like, it's going to be similar, so I'm just going to get Elden Ring, and eventually I'll get Demon's Souls.
That makes sense. It is a phenomenal game, and the loading is incredibly quick now.
That's good. It's good to
you die and you're back in the action straight away. But with that being said, I have been playing Horizon Forbidden West. So initially I had planned to kind of maybe delay a purchase of this one until after this mega busy period, but I decided to go for it and grab it, especially as you can get the PS4 version, get the free PS5 upgrade. And I have to say, so far I've been really enjoying it. I wasn't one of those people who was entirely captivated by the first game in quite the same way as it seemed that the more general community was captivated by it. But I have to say, I've really enjoyed it so far. It is visually stunning. So obviously, if Frozen Wilds is, you can expect this as a PS5 game to take it up maybe 10 notches. It looks amazing. It plays incredibly smoothly on the 60 FPS kind of favor frame rate mode, while retaining a lot of the visual quality as well. One thing that I thought was really good so far was that the facial textures and the facial animations are much better this time. So that was one thing that I felt was quite weak in the last game. Maybe there was more of an emphasis on the open world and the density of grass and things like that. There's some things like the facial animations and some of the skin textures and things like that took a bit of a backseat. But this time around, they've all had a lot of love and attention. The characters look amazing. They're amazingly modelled, very detailed. So that is a massive improvement over the last one. Thematically, so far, it's quite similar. I am only in the kind of prologue area, so I haven't broken through onto kind of where's next. So it could be that a lot of that develops over the course of kind of the 30-hour runtime. But the UI is carried over. So that's another kind of similarity that that chain through the last game. Something that I've also spotted with Gran Turismo 7 seems to be maybe something that is becoming more kind of more of a popular thing to do is retain UI over titles. The combat for me felt much more responsive this time. Now I have a feeling that it feels much more responsive because you're getting twice the FPS. When I initially played Horizon Zero Dawn, it's maybe 2018. So you had the 30 FPS version. That was it. But now, and a lot of the kind of fine movement in combat was lost because of the slower frame rate, which is why maybe I didn't take to it as much as I would have liked to. But now with 60 FPS, the combat is fast, it's fluid, it's engaging. It feels far better than it did in the last title. So that is a mix of those, I think, just general gameplay improvements, but also the frame rate doubling. There's a better, more diverse skill tree as well. So there's lots more places to put points into. They're very generous with points, and it means that you can be a bit more kind of nuanced in your build. Throughout the game, that favors maybe a more ranged approach to combat or a more up close approach to combat. So I think I'm really enjoying it so far. My first impressions are good. Despite not being totally in love with the first game, I have felt that there's so far a lot of improvement has been made in the areas that I thought fell short in the last title. So I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's a game that is definitely worth playing. So alongside that, I haven't been able to kind of touch on this much as I've been busy playing Forbidden West, but Total War Warhammer 3 came out on the 17th, so that was this past Thursday. From a review perspective, it's gained phenomenal reviews. It's been critically acclaimed across the board, which is an impressive feat for the third title in a series, this trilogy. And so it's obviously hit the nail on the head for those who've managed to get more time out of it so far. But I've only played kind of a few hours. It's so far has got really good narrative. It feels more focused than the last couple of games, which felt like a lot of the narrative was driven by yourself. So far, it feels like there are more narrative points throughout the campaigns that kind of give you incentive to keep going and to engage with some of the kind of features and tools at your disposal with your your faction, your character type. The visuals are amazing, as usual. There's a lot more detail in the open world as well. Well, the open world, I say, but the campaign map itself. So it's far more enjoyable to spend time on that instead of kind of wanting to get into battles in order to see some of that fine detail. But with that being said, the battle detail is phenomenal. The models of the characters and the combat is really well animated and visualized. So when you get up close into those kind of those fights, they're really enjoyable to watch. It retains the classic Total War formula, so it's not necessarily pushing the boat out, but what it is doing is amping up a lot of the elements of the previous titles that most people loved, and so it's just taking those to another level, taking the narrative to another level, the gameplay features kind of up a notch, and that means that while it's not reinventing the Total War wheel, it's focusing more on the things that people love about the Total War series. There's tons of customizability for characters as well, armors and skill sets, build trees, all sorts. You're going to get hundreds of hours out of this game. Obviously, there are many factions as well, so there's lots to choose from. The only thing that I would say is that while I really enjoy the Warhammer series, I am personally more of a fan of the historical titles for Total War. And I'm just really hoping that we get an announcement somewhat soon about the next historical Total War game, which is rumoured to be either set during the late Victorian era or a new medieval title in the medieval series. So this would be Total War Medieval 3 or whatever they decide to
Okay.
title it. I, as somebody graduated in history, I'm a massive fan of the level um, of ability you get with the Total War games to kind of rewrite your own history, have whatever country you desire take over the world, despite that having been a probably historical impossibility. That's the kind of freedom that those games give you. So I just hope it won't be long until we see another one of those. But all around, I've loved what I've played so far, and it's been a really good week, I think, with Horizon and Total War together. They've been giving me quite a number of good hours, but there's obviously a lot more to come.
I would like to ask you actually
Yeah.
about Total War. As someone who hasn't had a good gaming PC in a very long time, the last Total War game I played was the first Rome one, I believe.
Okay, yeah, Rome Total War. Yeah.
How far from that is this game that you've been playing?
It's that's a funny question, because the fundamentals of the game, which are a campaign map in which you control a faction, build resources, build buildings, whatever it might be, and take over, invade other areas of the map to control them, and then you go into the kind of real-time battle aspect. A lot of those fundamentals haven't changed, but what has changed is how far you're able to push those. So the level of uniqueness to your kind of playthrough, there's far more of that now than there was maybe in Rome, because the level of AI complexity when it comes to how other AI factions function, how the level of complexity in terms of what those factions do, how buildings work or impact the greater world, a lot of that has grown more. There's far more depth to that now. And again, with the battles are grander in scope. The amount of units are bigger. The siege battles are more complex. So it's almost like, taking the two core components of the Total War games and just pushing them as far as you possibly can with kind of the scope of the technology we have now. But if you liked Rome Total War, you would like where Total War is now. You're not gonna. There's nothing about Total War games now that's so fundamentally changed that you go, oh, this isn't for me, because that's what makes those games so unique. There's no other game that has that that real-time strategy battle format, whilst also having a top-level campaign kind of, overlord kind of system where your aim is to capture as much of the map as possible. So I think if you were to get hold of a kind of decent PC and get a new PC build, then I think you're going to really enjoy what is there. And Warhammer 3 is part of Game Pass as well, day one. So if that was something that you got when you got yourself a PC, obviously it's at your disposal to play as much or as little as you want. But yeah, that's what I'd probably say. You'll enjoy it if you liked Rome. Yeah,
I'll definitely give it a go when I'm able to.
Yeah. So that's everything from me for this week. There's lots more to play for Forbidden West and for Total War. Obviously, you're going to play some more Ghost Runner, I'm sure, but there is a lot coming over the next week. So with that being said, we'll move on to our last section, which is just a bit of a discussion over what's coming over the next week.
So we're going to take a look at what's coming out over the next few weeks. This past week, a few days back, a new Elden Ring overview trailer was released, which had a narrator sort of discussing all of the different aspects of the game, everything you can do, everything they've added to it. It is clear that it takes cues from Western open world games, but still maintains the challenge and the mystery of the previous From Software titles. It was mentioned that there is something in the game called Legacy Dungeons, which I think is the idea is those areas are specifically the ones where you'll feel like you're playing a Souls game. Despite the old games not being classed as open world, for all intents and purposes, they kind of were, but this goes for a much broader scope with lots of horseback traversal and fast travel. There's a huge open world map. They made a point of saying you'll want to put your markers down when you see things of note. Just looks huge and really plays into that sort of high fantasy idea, a huge world. And what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I thought the trailer looked amazing, and it's got me really excited for Friday's release. It reminded me in some sections of Shadow of the Colossus, in that the instead of the maybe more Western idea of holding your hand and giving you somewhere specifically to go to, it's very kind of targeted gameplay mechanics. You go on the map and you click on an icon, you head there. Whereas it seems like with this and like Shadow of the Colossus, a lot of it is just about heading in a direction, finding out what is there. You know, it not being a case of go to ABC. Instead, why not go to A, see what's there? Maybe you want to go check out B, but you don't have to just yet. You could pop over to C. You know, that mystery of the kind of previous From Software titles is there because they said open your map. You spot something that you want to go and check out, open your map, put a marker there, and go and find out what's there. We're not going to tell you what's there. We're just going to give you this overworld map so that you have some context to the game and to kind of the world itself. But as for what's in it, go and find out. If you hit something that you don't think you can get past, go and check something else out. Go and do that until you're ready to come back. And that really excites me because every single individual person who plays this will have their own experience because they will all decide where to head first. I will probably decide to head somewhere that's different to you, different to the next person. So everybody's interaction with the game is going to be kind of special, personal to them, which I'm really excited about. I think it's going to be a phenomenal game. One thing that I thought was interesting, and this kind of received maybe not some backlash, more of confusion, was around the recommended and minimum specs for the PC version, which were an i5 8400. So the 8th generation i5s, which are relatively recent CPUs, kind of decently medium tier, but then 12 gigabytes of RAM, which was a peak. You know, normally you have either 8 or in most cases these days people have 16.
Yeah.
But it's very strange that they've specified an amount of 12 for the minimum specification. And then a GTX 1060. Now, normally the 960 or even lower was kind of the benchmark for current games for the minimum specs, but it seems that's being pushed up now. We also don't know. We don't know what that will hit in terms of frame rate. You know, there's been a move towards specification releases saying, you know, if you want 1080p at 30 FPS, this is what you need. If you want 1440p at 60, etc. So it'll be interesting to see what those specs will get in Elden Ring. I'm going to get it on PS5 just to be able to play it on the sofa, and I know obviously you are too. So
there's some multiplayer as well, which I didn't actually realise until the trailer. Which I believe is actually maybe 3 or 4 people you can have in this.
Yeah, I think similar to the previous From Soft titles where you can have a number of people, but it's yet to be seen whether it's going to be more PvP or kind of co-op focused. Because in the
I think it's
previous
co-op,
games,
and I'm sure in an interview they said they're going to make the way that you get to it a lot more accessible than in the past. So I know,
Yes.
especially the earlier Dark Souls games, I think it was quite awkward to try and match with the person you wanted to and stuff like that.
It was, yeah, much in the same way as maybe in kind of Monster Hunter. There's a very complex system for joining co-op multiplayer. I think maybe they're, and I don't know whether that is kind of the Western, more of a Western influence, or just obviously what the kind of gaming world is moving towards. But yeah, in the past, it was almost a mystery trying to figure out how on earth to get multiplayer working how you wanted it to. So it'd be great to jump into that co-op. Obviously, we can check some things out co-op and come back and have a chat about our experience. But for me personally, I'm incredibly excited. More excited than I've been for a FromSoft title since Bloodborne.
I'm hoping that I'm really excited, and I just hope that I don't have that experience where quite early on I hit a difficulty wall and then just get frustrated
and then give up.
Yeah, because it looks amazing. I want to experience as much of it as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's everything on Elden Ring. Aside from that, we've obviously got the Witch Queen coming out on Tuesday. So that's gonna be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. And then a week on Friday is Gran Turismo 7. And then on March 10th is going to be Dawn of Ragnarok, which is the new Assassin's Creed Valhalla expansion, standalone expansion. Actually, I don't think it's standalone, but it's the price of a standalone
and
expansion.
Size.
Yeah.
You do need
the base game, but
I saw it on the store.
I think it's £35 for that. So expecting that to be quite extensive. Maybe kind of a Blood and Wine, The Witcher size expansion. So there's lots to come. It's going to be a really exciting couple of weeks, and obviously we can't wait to come back and tell everybody about how we found it, how we found Elden Ring and the Witch Queen, and there'll be lots to discuss. Really excited.
We should have a lot to talk about next weekend.
Really excited to come back and chat about that. With that being said, I think that's everything from us this week. There's been a lot of obviously talk over the Nintendo online stores. We'll see how that pans out. Obviously, we've seen about Ubisoft and Platinum Games saying they're open for a buyout, so we'll have to see if more acquisitions are on the horizon, which I think we both certainly think there will be. And we obviously had the issues, further delays to Bioshock 4. So it's been an interesting week when it comes to news. I'm sure it will be next week as well when we come back to discuss the past week's gaming news. So remember, our next episode will go live next Tuesday at 7 p.m. GMT. Be sure to like and subscribe, and also leave any feedback you have for us down in the comments. We look forward to hearing what you think about it. So I think that's all from myself. That all from you, Will?
That's all from me.
Yeah, with that being said, have a good rest of your evening, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.